All right. All right. Again, thank you for joining us. My name is Michelle Maxwell, and I have the pleasure of working for the American Academy of Neurology. And I'm a part of planning these webinars as a result of going virtual from not being together this spring at the annual meeting. All right, and now I get the opportunity to introduce our facilitator today. Is Dr. Clinton Wright. He's a vascular neurologist and specialist in cognitive disorders. He's director of the Division of Clinical Research and the associate director for the National Institute of Neurologic Disorders and Stroke, and the acting chief of the stroke branch within the Division of Intramural Research. I also get the opportunity to work with Dr. Wright as he serves as the vice chair of AAN's Clinical Research Subcommittee. Dr. Wright, thank you for being here, and we'll turn it over to you.
Terrific, Michelle. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here and talk to everybody today in this Futures in Neurological Research program. So you can see on this slide what the goal is, that we want to focus on successful research strategies and outcomes for everybody that is in training across the spectrum. And really today we want to talk about that funding piece and the NIH research opportunities in particular. So we're really lucky to have Dr. Koroshetz with us to talk about that, and Dr. George, who's very involved in AAN and research opportunities through AAN. And all of us are stroke people. So if you have questions outside of stroke, you may be in trouble. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, yeah, so, we have obviously had to adapt significantly to the ongoing pandemic. And what that has meant is a bunch of virtual programs, which I actually think have given us great opportunities to really engage with the community maybe a little bit more frequently and in different ways than we have before. So normally, we have programs at the annual meeting that include the half-day boot camp and a luncheon. But we have these virtual themes now that really take on a bunch of different topics in this area of neurologic research. And so we're talking about funding means freedom, and we have some more stuff coming down the pike. So just in terms of housekeeping for today, we want you to really put in questions for the panelists in the Q&A section, and really use that section for that. And you can give a thumbs up to particular questions without having to repeat them. So if you see a question that was kind of what you had in mind, if by giving it a thumbs up, you actually increase its priority and sort of raise it up a little bit higher in terms of what might be answered first. So you need to know that. And then the chat section is really more for technical issues. So just a little clarification on that. There's going to be a poll at the end that we really hope people will stay around and fill out so that we can know how we did and know how we can make it better. And as you probably noted when you signed on, the webinar is being recorded. So we're going to have Demystifying the NIH and Understanding the Mission and Priorities of the NINDS, given by Dr. Koroshetz, who is the director of NINDS and my boss. So thanks a lot for putting me in this position, and hopefully I'll still have a job when we finish up. And Paul George, who is I'll introduce a little bit later, but it works heavily in the AAN research program as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Dr. Korchettes, but I'll just want to mention a couple of things about his bio. So in addition to being the director of NINDS, he really has spearheaded a bunch of really important programs, and this is a part of me keeping my job, a bunch of important programs at NIH, including pain programs, the brain program, the blueprint program, and TBI program. So he's really been a force, I think, for getting trans NIH initiatives going. And it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Koroshetz as usual.
Thanks very much, Clint. It's great having people like yourself working at NINDS to try and push the science forward that brings hopefully treatments to patients with neurologic disease. That's what we're kind of all about. And so I'll talk a little bit about NIH and try and demystify it, but it's a pretty mysterious place, so we probably won't get all the way through that, and talk a little bit about the priorities. So on this slide, you see the kind of fundamental pieces of our institute. So our mission is to seek fundamental knowledge about the brain and the nervous system, and then to use that knowledge to reduce the burden of neurological disease. Now, I just wanted to say that we have over the years been involved in many different treatment trials that failed, and usually they fail because we made assumptions about the biology that were wrong, and we didn't know it at the time. We oftentimes don't understand it, but this problem of understanding the basics of how the nervous system works is still our Achilles heel. And so we invest heavily in basic research. That's probably where we put most of our money. And basic research means disease agnostic research, but also research on the mechanism of different diseases. And that's probably 65% of our funds go to that type of research. Often that's laboratory research, but some of it's actually basic research studying patients with different disorders. Then we have the clinical research, which Clinton runs, and that is a mix of research on patients and basic mechanisms of their disease, but heavily Clinton is involved in the running of our clinical trials, which are an art form in and of themselves. And we have some very sophisticated clinical trial programs at NINDS, particularly the networks, NeuroNext, which looks at first in disease treatments, new treatments, a phase 2 trial network. The stroke network, which looks at prevention and rehabilitation and acute treatment of stroke, and trials that are at the phase 2 stage as well as the phase 3 stage. And we also have with NHLBI a emergency neurology network. It's actually for neurology and heart, lung, and blood issues for those critical illnesses that come into the emergency department are very successfully attacked by that network. And then we have something a little bit unusual with the NINDS. I call it a virtual pharmaceutical company. It's a group of people who all came in from industry, and they have run programs to help move treatments that come from discoveries through the process needed to get to FDA approval to go into trials in patients. So that's our translational program. And we try to identify the gaps in research and the public health needs and move towards them. We're more of a bottom-up agency than a top-down agency. NINDS does not tell you what to do. We are a granting agency, and so we rely heavily on innovative ideas that come in from investigators. They get reviewed by study sections, they get a score, and we fund the best scores until we run out of money. And so that's basically the majority of our money goes out through that process of submitting grants, reviewing grants, getting scored. We do put a lot of emphasis to training because we can see to the future that the new tools coming on are so much more powerful than in the past, and the excitement around developing better therapies in the future is really, really quite tremendous now. And to do that, you have to have new tools. And so we do support the development of new tools and resources to enable discoveries. And then just to say, like today, we're communicating with folks to let them know what our institute is about and how to take advantage of the funding opportunities. So next slide. The next slide, I wanted to just make the point that at NIH, neuroscience is, at least prior to COVID, was the biggest area of research. So more money going into neuroscience and even cancer, infectious disease, or cardiovascular sciences. And that's because the funding is distributed among multiple different institutes, and because multiple institutes get grants from people who are interested in studying the nervous system, whether it's drug abuse in the nervous system, or retinal or occipital circuit function that goes to the Eye Institute, or the Mental Health Institute, clearly heavily into neuroscience. The Aging Institute received a $2 billion a year increase in their budget for dementia research. So that is almost all going to neuroscience. So in terms of the funding, neuroscience is really at the top. And that bodes well, it's particularly for physician scientists, because that means that a lot of these discoveries are going to be coming out of research. And it's actually the physician scientists, which is kind of the bottleneck in terms of moving those to patients. So we really need physician scientists to step up there. Next slide. I kind of went through this. This is how we are organized: basic research, which is fundamental, as well as disease-focused translational research to move things forward to a IND or IDE, and then clinical research to do clinical trials. And each of these is very competitive. So things have changed over the last 30 years, so that competing for funds, and it's a lot of money in each of these areas, really requires a lot of clever ideas and sophisticated knowledge. The average size of an NIH regular grant is $443,000 a year for 5 years. So each of these grants, as you can see, is over $2 million. So this is a big investment by the taxpayer, and we look very seriously to make sure that money's being well spent. Next slide. And there have certainly been great discoveries, and this is just one which I hope everyone knows about, is the treatment of spinal muscular atrophy, which is really dramatic. But I put it up there because this is just the beginning of what I think is going to be so exciting as gene therapy comes into neurology. So this was a good demonstration of how powerful it is, but there's going to be much more coming down the road. This timeline just tells you how much time it takes from the initial discoveries to get into patients. And we're always trying to shorten that, but it raises the importance of the early basic disease research, which then really can lead to a treatment. Next slide. And in terms of training, I want to just mention that the Academy, as well as NINDS, is real serious about trying to improve the diversity of our workforce. No one is happy at all with what it looks like right now. I think, if I recall, 2% of neurologists are African Americans, and that's probably the same thing with NIH overall. And NINDS, R01 holders, only 1% African American. So we have a long way to go, and I think together we can make progress. But and this is the time to do it. So we are very active in this space now. Next slide. The next slide just shows a number of the training opportunities that we have. So we have the Signature Physician Scientist Award at the top, the K Awards, the KOH for laboratory research, the K23 for clinical research. These are 5-year grants, career development grants. And they unfortunately now take quite a bit of time to break into them. For the MD PhDs, we're trying to help them to break in within a year or two of finishing the residency. We'll talk about an R25 program in a second, which is also has shown that these folks are breaking into the K funding within 2 years of their residency. But for others, it really takes time to train to be able to compete for this award, up to 3 or even 4 years sometime. We have, in blue, we have grants that are available to MDs, but generally used by PhDs. Some of the K99 R00 programs, these are programs where you get 2 years of mentorship money, and then you also get 3 years of independent research funding at a job. So these are kind of really the ones that that many of the PhDs looking forward to getting prior to getting a job. There have been some MDs have run this successfully, but the more common way is to go through the KOA K23 pool and then to an R01, which is the signature grant at NIH. And then at the bottom, we have a number of diversity programs, which reach out to high school students, undergraduate students, graduate students, postdocs, and even to help transition people to new faculty positions who come from socioeconomic, racial, ethnic minority groups. So we spend a lot of time on the training programs. Next slide. And in terms of the physician scientist, so I said it is a bottleneck, and this kind of shows you the number of the K award applications over the last 20 years. And actually, if you even go back further, the same thing, it's flat. You know, we haven't seen any increase. The number of medical students has increased, the number of medical school faculty has increased, but people applying for the K awards has not increased. And we don't have a pay line. We'll pay any good grant that gets a good score on a K application. And we're always looking for more people to come into this space because, as I said, the physician scientists, and these are the physician scientist awards. As you can see, we get this is all across NIH, 400 people a year. I'm sorry, 800 people a year. That's for all of NIH. For NDS, it's about 70 people a year. So not enough to really carry the ball given the explosion in neuroscience research. Next slide. And so these are the Clinician Scientist Awards I mentioned, the K Awards, 5-year grants, and then the KO2 is kind of a bridge between, for some people who go through the KOA or K23 and need a couple more years to get independent support through an R01. So these are only for physician scientists. Next slide. The R25 program is something that we started in 2008, where we were really worried about the drop off of K applications. And this is a program where institutions apply, and if they apply and are successful, showing that they will support physician scientists, we'll let them submit as many applications from individual residents as they want, and we'll fund those residents to do research during their residency, and then they will get 2 years of funding after their residency in the research space, with the idea that that will get them enough time to submit a K application. And this actually seems to be working. You have to submit a K application by the 18th month of the fellowship to get the last 6 months of funding. So people do that, and surprising enough, they're getting quite successful at getting the K applications within 2 years of finishing their residency or fellowship. So there's a special program that we hope will increase the number of people, physician scientist folks. Next slide. I also want to mention that loan repayment is very much in the game here, that many people are coming out with big loans, and the loan repayment program, you apply for it, it has a pretty high chance of success. It's not 100% chance, but it's a high success rate. And it'll pay up to $50,000 a year of qualified educational debt. And this is going to go over many years. So a lot of people can completely eliminate their debt if they get funded for this loan repayment program. Next slide. And I just wanted to throw out that there are a couple of big projects that we don't really have time to go into them. But the BRAIN initiative is a fantastic project that's developing tools to monitor, map, and modulate neural circuits in lots of animal models, but also in humans. The HEAL program is being driven to develop better non-addictive treatments for people with pain. And as I mentioned, the Alzheimer's Project Act gave $2 billion a year to the Aging Institute. We manage about 10% of that money for dementia research. So that is a very well-funded area now. And the last slide, I think the last slide next is just a plug on a podcast that the NINDS staff put together to really demystify NINDS for people who are coming into the field. So it's a series of podcasts that goes through all the aspects of NINDS. It's actually quite entertaining, surprising enough, for a government podcast. And I encourage people to listen and learn more about NINDS through the podcast. So with that, I'd like to stop, and happy to answer happy to hold on, and we'll answer questions after Paul presents. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's really great, Walter. Yeah, we'll hold the questions until the end, but I already see one question in the Q&A section, so that'd be great. So now we're going to move on to Paul George, who is also a stroke neurologist at Stanford and a faculty member there and involved in AAN Science Committee, as well as being chair, as you can see, of the AAN Research Program Subcommittee. So go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. And thanks for the Clinical Research Subcommittee for putting this on and giving us a chance to talk about some of the AAN's awards that they offer that often serve as a bridge to the awards that Dr. Koroshetz was talking, especially the K awards. And so just want to start a little bit about myself, which if there's certain questions in the Q&A, I'm not too far removed from where a lot of you are, I think. I was fortunate enough to get one of the AAN awards a few years back, and then that set me up very nicely for one of the K awards that I was lucky enough to get. And then I'm currently right now trying to break down that R01 door as my K wraps up here. So that's where I am in the research timeline. And I just want to say how overall, you know, at times it can be challenging, but it really is a worthwhile path. I've seen as my own group has grown that there's, you know, few professions and things where you get to ask any question that you're excited about, and then can most times find the funding to support that. And so, you know, it really is a worthwhile endeavor, I think, as we try to improve some of the patient treatments and care for our patients. And so, and often, as even I think that first question I saw, you know, the funding really is what makes this happen. So we're glad you're here today to hear about some of the funding that the AAN provides, as well as obviously the NIH as well. Next slide, please. So the AAN has been very committed to supporting this neurologic research. They too feel it's very important for our members as well as our patients to continue the research pipeline from clinician scientists as well as other researchers in the neuroscience field. They've been doing it for over 2 decades now through the research award programs that they have set up, and as well as programmatic opportunities to help train young scientists. And these really are aimed at moving the field of neurology and neuroscience forward to help with care of neurology patients. And it's sometimes a little confusing when you're looking at the web page, but it's a partnership with the American Brain Foundation, which is the funding partners, as well as the funding partners for many of these awards that allow this research to go on. And we'll get into that a little bit as we go through some of these awards. It's been, you can pick which metric you want to use to define success, and there are many, I think. But one of them is that, you know, almost 90% of people who receive one of the AAN awards go on to receive national funding, most through the NIH. And so that it's, I think with the support and protected time it gives a person, as well as some of the programs that it opens doors to through the AAN, it is a very successful program for helping to launch your research career. Next slide, please. So just a couple more poll questions. And if Brooke, you don't mind pulling up the poll, just to get a feel, how many of you have applied for a grant before? Yes or no, if have you applied for a grant before? And then if the second one shows it's a little more specific, what do you need to apply for grant funding? What is one of the main things that's important to you at your current stage? Mentor, time, finding a good research question, we're just unclear. All right, so it looks like majority of folks have applied for funding before, so that's great. And then hopefully these will provide you, today's session will provide you with some more information for perhaps next funding steps. And then fairly split across the board that, you know, mentorship is still a key aspect people are looking for, the finding the right research question time. So all of these seem fairly important. Okay, great. Next slide. So I think we can touch on some of those as we answer questions as well. So just to go through a few of the award opportunities that the AAN offers. The first ones we'll talk about are the ones that are funded completely by the American Academy, and they, as Dr. Koroshetz mentioned, with the responsibility of taxpayer money, AAN kind of looks at it the same way with members' funds and things that help to go to these. We take it very seriously. The committee that I'm on is the one that's in charge of reviewing all the applications that come in, and we do it only through the volunteer hours of other people in the academy that have, are interested in and are doing neurologic research. This is the award, the Career Development Award, is one of the more recent awards to the portfolio. It was developed as members are trying to get, as Dr. Korchettes says, knock down that door to the K funding. And this is the AAN's equivalent to a mini K award. So you can see it's fairly substantial funding over 3 years. And it's aimed at those that are a little further removed from residency and fellowship. So they've been doing some research, maybe not able to get the K yet, but need just an award to supplement that, or to not supplement, but to take the place of the K to get to the R01 funding, or buy a little more time to get to where they feel competitive for a K. So really junior faculty for this award. It can be any type of research, clinical, basic, or translational, as long as it's in the field of neurology and neuroscience. And you can see here 5 to 10 years out from the time you finish your residency. Next slide. The Clinical Research Training Scholarship is one of the mainstays of the research portfolio offered by the AAN. It's been around the longest, I believe, and 150,000 over 2 years. This is also more recently is focused on research with human subjects, or really translational research with animal models in the lab, aimed at developing treatments or enhancing the diagnosis of neurologic disease. And this is aimed at those early career folks who have just finished residency, up to 5 years after that, as well as PhDs who are studying really translational or using human subjects in their research. Next award, please. And then more recently developed, that is kind of broken off from the CRTS, is this Neuroscience Research Training Scholarship. This is also an early career award with 150,000 over 2 years, and aimed at junior investigators interested in laboratory-based, so a little more on the basic side. It can also include some translational models, but work in neurology as well. Next slide, please. And then the final AAN funded award is a Practice Research Training Scholarship. Over the years, it's we've been made aware that it's hard to find funding for this type, to support this type of research, especially early on. And so that's where this award came from. And it's similar to the CRTS. It's 2 years, 150,000. Really aimed at research that improves our practice of neurology and medicine, and aimed at that early career time frame as well. Next slide, please. And then we're able to also leverage the AAN's membership and position in neurology to help work with many partners. And we're really thankful for all the partners who help contribute to make more awards possible. And so when you look through the awards, you'll see each year it varies a little bit depending on which partnerships we have, as to if there's areas, specifically different areas in neurology that are offered. And these are just names of many partners who have worked with us currently or over the years. Next slide, please. And so just to go quickly through the disease grant opportunities that are currently going to be offered next year or as well as this year. So there's the Clinical Research Scholarship in Lewy Body Disease, which is offered every year. We have the McKnight Clinical Translational Research Scholarship, and that's in cognitive aging and age-related memory loss. And then the Robert Katzman Award, that's the Clinical Research Training Scholarship, also in Alzheimer's related disorder, that's offered every other year. And so these are really disease-specific awards. Usually if your research fits nicely in one of these, they do have slightly less number of applicants than the general awards. So it's good to see where your research matches for these different awards. Next slide, please. We also have the Epilepsy Clinical Neurophysiology Award, the Susan Spencer CRTS. And then also in movement disorders, we have the Parkinson's disease CRTS that is offered each year. And so again, when you go to the fellowship webpage on the AAN site, you'll see the different disease state grant opportunities that will be available for that year. And we're always working with the ABF to try to increase the number of these. Next slide, please. We also have neuromuscular and clinical neurophysiology, and there's several awards under this disease area. There's the main neuromuscular CRTS, and then several ALS awards. One is a slightly different award. The Clinician Scientist Development Award is actually a 3-year award, and has a slightly longer time frame for when you can apply for that after residency. And then the other two ALS awards are similar to the other CRTSs and related to ALS or related diseases. Next slide, please. And so we're right in the thick of our current award cycle. The application closed a couple weeks ago, and we're getting the awards out, or the applications out to our reviewers. So we're starting to review the awards currently. And that takes through the end of the year. And then in January, the recipients receive the announcement of if they were awarded the fellowships. And then for next year's, for the 2022 cycle in July is usually when the application open up on the website for the 2022 awards. And the deadline is usually similar this year in early October for those award applications. And so that's usually the cycle each year. Next slide. And so just wrapping up here, what do we look for this successful fellowship awardee? I'm not sure how many have seen The Mandalorian, but a lot of times it's like the Baby Yoda. So a patient or a clinician or a researcher that has a lot of potential and a lot of good questions and ideas. And then so that's the first part of what we're looking for is the candidate and their how they're doing. And then the next part is the mentoring team. So Brooke, you can click one more. Yep. And so every successful researcher has had one or more, often more mentors that have helped them get to where they're at. So that's the other part, is you're putting together your mentoring team, the resources you need to be successful in your research. Those are things we also look for in the applications. And then the final component that we look for is a exciting research idea. So we really want to find ideas that will help move our field along, help get better treatments for our patients. And so that also is evaluated in the applications. And so if we feel if we have all three of these, and we usually get some amazing applications, we're setting you up for success and for continuing your research career going forward. And so that's kind of the outline of things we look for in our application status. So we're always happy to answer questions and get you more up to date on what's being offered. There's the other thing that the awardees get to take part in are the different program opportunities that the AAN offers. And so in years past, it's been at the annual meeting often, but this year we've been able to use the virtual nature to spread out some of these events. But there's opportunity for celebration and networking. Usually at the annual meeting, there's a breakfast where members of the NIH, like Dr. Koroshetz and his team, are there to see all the awardees, as well as other researchers and the science committee of the AAN and across the AAN are there to hear about the exciting work that's about to begin. There's also alumni, as I mentioned at the beginning. This is a 20-year plus program with a lot of researchers that are leaders of the field, and so there's exciting alumni networking, reception and events. And then there's also more training. Most of these awards are positioned to get folks to the K step. And so there's a research symposium that's given at the annual meeting each year. And some of these have been turned to virtual events that awardees are asked to attend. And so they can meet people from the NIH who are directly involved with the K Awards, hear from past awardees and other successful researchers on steps to take in your early career. And so these program opportunities really do help, we feel, set the stage for a successful research career going forward. Next slide. And so the AAN tries to promote or promotes a very active research community. So there's one of the newest things is a Synapse community that's been set up around neurologic research. Feel free to reach out to any of the staff members or myself about questions or resources, and we try to guide you in the right direction and are always excited to get people involved in a research career. So I think that's it. Thanks for listening. Happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Dr. George. All right, so we're kind of in the question and answer phase. There's a couple of things that were answered in the Q&A already, and then there's a couple of open questions. So one of them, I guess, is for Dr. Koroshetz from okay, that seems to have been answered. It's disappearing before my eyes. And now for Dr. George, are Canadians eligible to apply for the AAN Awards as well?
Yes, the general AAN ones can be international applicants. A few of the partnered funding awards do have some stipulation, but most of them are also open for international awardees. So it's important just to look through the RFAs when they come out to make sure that it doesn't say US only, but majority are open to international applicants.
There's also a question in the chat box, which I think was meant to be in the Q&A, which is for both of you, about how COVID-19 has impacted the availability of funding, if it has. And so maybe both of you could comment on that.
Go ahead, Paul. Why don't you go first?
Yeah, from the AAN component, the AANs continue to have put a lot of emphasis in supporting research awards. And so all of the categories awards are still offered this year from the AAN funded, which took a lot of effort from dedicated staff and the academy. So there are in some categories slightly fewer awards this year, but we would hope to regain those levels as things get back to normal.
Thanks. And Walter?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the big thing at NIH has been trying to respond to the COVID crisis. So I think, Clint, maybe we could talk about the things that we need to do. From what we've seen, there's some pretty serious effects on the nervous system. And so we're pretty heavily engaged in trying to solve that for sure.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that, Clint?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a really good message for everybody on the call to receive, that, the NIH is really trying to address a lot of questions around COVID, and NINDS is very involved in that effort. And so we really want to understand the neurological complications of COVID from our standpoint. We have a funded database that is run out of NYU, a COVID database, which allows practitioners to enter information about patients that have suffered from COVID-19 and may have neurological complications. So there's opportunities there to even potentially even do stuff that you might not normally be able to do as a young investigator. You could get involved in gathering data potentially through that and organize at the local level. Then there's opportunities that if you know of large studies that are going on that maybe have been around for a long time and are starting to look into COVID, if you have potential mentors that are involved in those studies, ask them about whether COVID is on their research radar, whether it's in scope now. It's been a real challenge for us from the clinical trial standpoint. Many of our clinical trials and a lot of our clinical research, had to kind of go on pause, and it's starting to open back up, to some extent, but it's also slow. And as the numbers, seem to creep back up, of course, that may have an effect on how we're able to recruit into our clinical trials. So we're kind of waiting, right, Walter, to see what happens with that and with any funding that might be provided by Congress to address that issue. But so far, we've been given money to look at many of the complications across the NIH mission, and we have a lot of programs that are really developing there, including treatment trials and so on. So we have
see one question about, well, it's a comment about the time. So it's probably a good thing to know that an NIH grant is a little bit, and the time frame is like, just remember, it's kind of like having a baby. So you submit a grant, and the grant goes into this gigantic system, and it comes out and goes to review, which is usually 3 or 4 months after it comes in. Then it gets reviewed, and then it goes to the next council to make a decision about funding. And there are 3 councils per year, separated by 4 months. So in general, by the time you submit a grant and the time you learn about whether you get funded is about 9 months. And that's true throughout NIH for everything. So the system is not built for rapid decisions. It's built for very considered, multi-tiered evaluation decisions. So you have to know that to be successful. The only exceptions are like in public health emergencies like COVID, where we call for applications, we put money out within a couple of weeks. But that's not the usual. You have to be able to prepare for that 9-month process. And the other thing is most people don't get their grant the first time. So that means you got to resubmit and apply again. But in many instances, which adds on another 9 months. So that is something you really need to know and prepare about. And so you never want to submit your grant kind of, just at the last minute type of thing. You want to always submit about a year before you really need the money. If there was another question about people who are not citizens, and so the grants actually go to institutions, not to individuals. So R01 grants and the K99 awards go to institutions, and the applicant does not have to be a citizen. But unfortunately, the training grants, all the training grants are NIH, are stipulated by Congress that they can only be for citizens or green card holders. So that is a problem. And the way I have seen people successfully navigate that is to get funding initially from, the American Stroke Association, American Academy of Neurology, and then do research that gets them the R21 or the R01. The R21 is a 2-year grant. That's $150,000 a year. The R01 is kind of the signature grant. So that's how, and there are so many people who are not citizens who have come through the system. So although you can't get these K awards, except for the K99, you can be very successful.
Yeah, there's also a question about the LRP and whether the pay line for the LRP is the same across institutes. I actually don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know either, to be honest. So we'd have to check on that.
Yeah.
I think that the institutes do have leeway to pay more, but I would have to check on that. I did put in the chat box the link to the LRP website, which has all the information about applying for loan repayment.
Okay. Great, thank you. Oh yeah, I see it in the chat box, not in the Q&A box. I will copy and paste it into the Q&A also. Not sure if I can do that. I don't seem to be able to do that. Anyway, you can look in the chat box for that answer. Okay, I think we've addressed all the questions. I don't know if there are any others.
One question we sometimes get, Dr. Koroshetz and Dr. Wright, is who to talk to first when you're thinking of submitting a K. Is it Dr. Korn, or are there better people to reach out to, or how do you kind of first engage with the NIH?
So that's a really good question. So for a K award, yes, it's Dr. Korn. And then depending on what the disease area is, there may be someone else involved, the program director for that disease area, but Dr. Korn is in charge of the training. Now, so the way to approach the program at NIH is to think about what you want to do, look at a grant, somebody else's grant, see how it's put together, and particularly what's called the specific aims page. That's the key page in a grant. Look at someone else's specific aim page, try and think of what you want to do and put it into that form of specific aims, and then send that to Dr. Korn in an email. What's not generally useful is to call up and not have an idea what you want to do and just kind of talk, in vague terms, because the program directors really don't know what to do with that. They're much better if you can crystallize ahead of time what you want to do, and they can help you do that or fashion it. But they're very helpful in doing that because that's their job. They love their job. I just say, think about it, do your homework, look at a grant, look at the specific aims page, try and get your ideas into that format and put that in the email, and you'll get some really good feedback.
Terrific.
Right.
That's really great. Thank you to both of you. I think this was a really informative session. So I think we'll move on. I'm not seeing anything else that has not been answered.